All right, I want to say good evening to our listeners, our viewers. This is the Houston Media Source, Public Affairs, Public Access show. We are certainly glad that you're joining us. The month of May has been designated Mental Health Awareness Month, the entire month. And we are privileged, very privileged to have some esteemed guests tonight who are going to indulge us with some understanding as well as information about where do we go from here. This is I said it during part one, a trifecta effect, which is affecting us. The president just made an announcement from the CDC today that if you have received your shot and that you are able to not wear your mask. And so the idea of normalcy is returning or beginning to return, not fully 100%, but enough to the point where people are out of that fear, some of the fear. And tonight we have some very distinguished guests, and I certainly hope that you will share this information with some of your friends, family members, because this topic tonight has not been discussed in any media circles, whether local or statewide or national. And besides the fact of the question, which came from Dr. Martin Luther King's book, Where Do We Go From Here? The question is mental health versus evil. The idea that today we're being affected by the dynamics of mental illness or mental instability or mental discombobulation because of these various types of abnormal behaviors that affect individuals. And then, of course, they affect the larger population of people as well as themselves and their family members. But the idea has not been presented, nor is it represented in our DSM-5, the question of evil. And those of us who understand from a theological perspective or use theological sources will tell you that evil is a part of our discussion. And so, quite frankly, in some cases, I want to open up a discussion with my colleagues tonight, certainly that speaks to what might be the definitions over and against one another, and if at all they meet and impact our society, whether individually or collectively or as a group. And let me put a footnote, because it's been such a major discussion about critical race theory discussions in the classroom that it's now being discussed by the legislature. And I was hoping that our state representative would come and give us an update on that. But the critical race theory is Dr. Mills, who is a noted sociologist and activist in our community here, give us some insight on that. I understand the critical race theory and give us a perspective of that first, if you would.
Well, Dr. Gilmore, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening and other colleagues and so forth. And I wrote a little editorial not too long ago for the Afro-American newspaper with Brother Malonson. Is America a racist country? And many of us have been asking that question lately, and in fact, some of our mainline politicians had to come out and say that America is not a racist country. But they didn't clarify what really is the truth of the matter. America is not a racist country by law since 1964, 1965. So there are no laws on the books that designate discrimination or exclusion on the part of the larger, community, whites against minorities. But racism exists and exists because 73 million people voted for Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has proven throughout his entire life that he is a racist. And so while we're not racist by law, there are a lot of practitioners in American society. Dr. Shabazz, you can agree with that wholeheartedly.
There are a lot of practitioners.
Yeah, we got a lot. We got a lot of practitioners.
Well, that's the mental illness side too.
Racism. That's the point, Dr. Gilmore. Racism is a mental illness because if you claim to be superior to another human being based upon skin pigmentation, you are insane. And we can see now what that leads to. It will lead to an insurrection. Right. We saw that in living color on January 6th.
So you're saying that the behavior that was demonstrated by the individuals was abnormal in the sense that it was a racist response to something. I guess my question is, what is the something?
Well, let's put it this way, Dr. Gill. First of all, evil is ontology. When a person is evil, it is a part of their DNA. It is a part of their being. Now, you can do some sinful things, and we all do some sinful things, So it's one thing to sin, but it's another thing to be evil. So when you evil, it's a part of your DNA, like the devil is evil. There is nothing good in him that can come out of him. And the imps of the devil, they're evil. You are not going to change their mindsets because from one generation to the next in their family structures, they pass on that kind of I'm superior to another human being simply because of skin color and so forth. So sin is being. It's just you doing something that you know is wrong, but then you try to seek forgiveness for it. And that's one thing. But when you evil, and that's you, that's a part of your being. It's you. That's ontology.
Dr. Higgins, what he said DNA. I mean, I know you are a scientific-minded individual, being in the medical field, have been, but how do you view that from a medical perspective of it could be in people's DNA? I've heard you use some acronyms from time to time that I've never heard before, by the way, but certainly you and your colleagues around the country have tried to give us a different view. How do you view that from a DNA perspective?
Well, the thing about it is that obviously, race and the external characteristics of an individual are based upon their DNA. Your code reads for you to have brown skin, kinky hair, wide nose. There are certain codings that's put out that your body is reading on how you're supposed to look. And somehow we've convinced or confused individuals to believe that one group is superior because their DNA externally shows that they look this way versus that way. And the crazy thing about DNA testing is they found that West Africans and Western Europeans are just as related as West Africans and East Africans. Oddly enough, because of trade routes, realize that the world has been around for a long time. It just didn't get that way. Shipping is nothing new. So just about everybody has some other type of DNA in them, other than the 10 people that when Mother Earth was formed and God formed man, they branched out of that 10 people. Worldwide travel has been around for well over 5,000 years. So the issue has become we've created something that wasn't there based upon characteristics on the outside. I have a cousin that we call Black. Now, for a Black man to be called Black amongst Black people, that means you're pretty dark. But he has a DNA, he has a white genetic recessive gene that they found in him, that they found that multiple people in the family have, as dark as he may be. So just because you look a certain way on the outside has little to do of what your DNA is doing on the inside, or where you're picking up characteristics from another person or individual. But but the fact is that we've written this into the language of who we are and what we do, understanding that before 1400s, there was no language about race or what color an individual was. Understanding that there have been white people in Africa and there have been Black people in Europe. But the fact is that we make it out to be that only these people come from this corner and only these people come from that corner. But the fact of the matter, as I know is covered in the cast book quite thoroughly, is that the white people from Europe who came to America were white, and most of the Black people from Africa were of Western sub-Saharan physical characteristics. Realizing that you have a whole mix of individuals in between. You have Black people in Europe, and you ask them, where did you come from? As far as they know, they came from Europe because they've been there for 2,000, 3,000 years. They didn't show up on no slave ship. There were trade routes and things of that sort. So there are things that we actually ignore. And so the point is that I'm saying is that we're actually using training for people to ignore actual history to create a history that is not even correct in order to put in practice racism. So will I say, and I love what Brother Mills just stated right now, we have practitioners. So I won't say that the United States is racist. My question, what I would focus more on is what kind of practice does the United States do? All right. So essentially, with people of different colors, with Blacks, 3/5 of man written directly into the Constitution. You look at the Chinese Americans who came over on the railroads during World War II. Japanese were put out the country, were not allowed to be citizens of the country, even though they had been here for more than a few generations, and were put into concentration camps. Not only in California, we had concentration camps for Japanese right here in the state of Texas. So the thought of the manifest destiny, where God just wants us to go from sea to shining sea, not to mention the elimination of 20 million natives sitting here on the continent, that who either died by illness or died by actual gun and by the spear. But we ignore those things to train people to have a narrative that is not true, so that they can feel in superiority of one group over another. And the thing is just a complete mess that we've created, but we suffer as people of color the most from this created ideology, understanding that before 1600, there were Africans in America. That's something that we don't pay attention to. That slavery went for about 200, 250 years. But you had Africans who came from the motherland free, just like Europeans came free, but we ignore that history. You have those who came during slavery, who were free, and then you have those who have come afterwards. So we're all a mix of individuals, understanding that they actually in America tried to enslave white people, and they tried to enslave Native American people. But we focus on Black people, and the fact is, what we have to pay attention to is why is that? What is the game that is being played on America and on our souls, causing us to behave in evil ways? And really, to me, if you want to look at it, and I'll just take it to another level, it's about the money. It's about who has and who does not have, and you play this game on people's mind to make them superior over one person or another, so that you keep this stratification of finances, money, and the ability for people to move up in society.
Dr. Shabazz, I know you have a storied history as an educator.
What have I walked in on? I don't even know.
Where do we go from here?
I just
You just
jammed
showed
in.
up.
Somebody called me at 5 o'clock, text me at 5 o'clock, tell me, are you coming on the show? And I'm okay. Then I got the link. So I don't know what I walked in on. So what is your topic, sir?
Where do we go from here?
Let me know whether I need to have some technical difficulties and accidentally fall off this line. Anyway, what's going on? How you doing, Dr. Mills?
It's a blessing.
You can handle it. You can handle
it. Yeah.
And Dr. Higgins.
Okay. Dr. Shabazz, we were just talking about the differences in mental illness, mental health over and against evil. And I had brought up the point about this critical race theory. You've heard about that. They are arguing the point in the state and the legislature if they're going to teach it or what. And Dr. Higgins obviously brought up the right point, because if they get the wrong book, the teacher's in trouble. I mean, in terms of being able to work with these kids or explain to them our history. But I know as a former educator and certainly as a community activist and current elected official, I know you see the differences. And sometimes don't you ask yourself the question, where does this person get this thought from?
Well, certainly, if I want to dwell on it, right? Because I'm like, okay, I know how to distance myself when things don't seem as if I need to be in that same space.
Yeah.
But the thing is, people feel that if they don't teach it, that they can erase it. And you cannot erase what has transpired. Okay. But at the same time, you have to let people know what happened and in hopes that it won't be repeated. But blindly believing that if you just don't talk about it, that it didn't happen, is not going to work well. Because sometimes people need to see how horrible things were for a particular race or culture to be able to say, oh, that was not right.
Right.
And that should not happen. And then they'll be very mindful of not repeating that. Mm. And so, it's going to be very difficult to just say, well, we're not gonna put it out there and nobody's gonna ever know. Mm. That's not gonna happen, because it's not only, everything is not in the books.
Right.
Some things are being taught in the homes. If not by vocalizing, it's by actions. And so, I think that the new generation is coming up, and I think they could grasp the wrongs and perhaps not continue in the wrongs that they find to have happened to other people.
You're absolutely correct, because it's about the family culture.
Exactly.
And the racism that we experience, it's taught in the families and passed on from one.
So you can say you don't want it in the books, but that's not going to erase it, nor is it going to keep people from seeing it more than reading it. And so if you see your parents behave a certain way towards African Americans, Asians, whoever, then you're going to tend to validate that by doing it yourself. And so I'm thinking that, we have used the schools in a lot of instances to let people see a different life and a different culture. The integration in the schools was supposed to do that. Of course, I believe that, we did better educationally segregated. But at the same time, I just don't believe that. I think that they're thinking that this is going to be erased if we don't teach it. And I don't think that that's the case, because it's going to be outside of the books, and that's really going to be, the children will be more impressionable regarding what they see done in their homes and in their culture than they will be by what's in a book.
OG, what's your view in that same sense on the street level?
Well, I just first I want to thank Dr. Shabazz. I want to thank Dr. Higgins, and I want to definitely, first time being online with, Dr. Mills. My perspective on dealing with this whole issue for the last 40 years, working on the front line, re-educate myself, 20 years of re-educate myself from the prison system to this time and now. And I've come to the conclusions dealing with at this time on where do we go from here, especially with the mental illness part that Black men haven't been allowed to use that topic as being somebody with a mental illness. Right now we're dealing with, in the area that I've been working with on Black boys, 73% of Black boys are committing suicide. That is a state of an emergency. Why are the Black boys at an alarming rate committing suicide? 73% we had an alarming rate on Black boys committing suicide. So when I see young people that I've been dealing with, for the last 30 years, the question, where do we go from here and how do we get back on track with Black boys in particular? I did some studies in the area of recovery coaching that I've been studying for the last 10 years after I got out of my prevention area of dealing with Operation Outreach, doing trauma-informed training. And I've seen that I had to look at the model of other races of people to find out, where do Black people get the answer to move forward to get our trauma up under control? Because I've learned that due to the Jewish community coming out of Germany, the scientists done studies on the DNA of the great-grandchildren of the Jewish people that come from the Holocaust. And they found out that the genes in the grandchildren was altered due to the trauma that they dealt with in Germany. And I asked the question in the Black community that we're studying up under attack by this race critical theory on trying to wipe out the history of us not teaching Black history in the schools and the jails. Everywhere I went, they've challenged me on teaching Black history to young Black men that saved my life. So I say that if the scientists done studies on the grandchildren of the Jews and find out that transgenerational trauma affected them today, why do we not say that what's happening to Black boys that jumps up when they're in the presence of these people that they call police, jump up and flee and run? We know that trauma transforms the genes in the mind, keeps young men before they're 25 in a fight, flight of survival. And if young Black boys are in a fight, flight of survival because their trauma have not been dealt with, we have never dealt with that because we're not allowed to deal with what's called mental illness. It's not, you just lazy, you sorry, you're not depressed. You know what I'm saying? Black, you just don't want to work. So even today, the word is out that Black men don't want to work. But we don't want to say that Black men suffer from mental illness, or suffer from depression, or suffer from anxiety, or suffer from PTSD coming out of the prison system from the crack cocaine era. So we send them to jail, we release them back in prison, and then we have no areas in the communities that we can send young men to come to know that how do you treat trauma? How do you treat trauma, which is a mental illness? Treating trauma is to build safe zones, safe places to where Black men can feel safe. Where is it in our community we can feel safe? We can't feel safe in our own home. We can't. I can't get in my car and go to work without, if I see a police, my body go into a certain form of anxiety. Just by seeing it, because I know that I'm an ex-offender, I got a record on my back, and I know that anything that I do, if it's right or wrong, they can rewrite their books and say, you got a record, and I'm gone. And I don't feel like in the community, after doing the work for 40 years, I don't feel like in our position, it's been shown too many times, because when whatever the narratives go to where whatever that's wrote on the police policy or whatever the media put out there, that's what our community go up on. So until we if we gonna go any further, I think that if we don't deal with the transgenerational trauma in treating that in the family, in the community, in the jails, we ought to be mass numbers going into the juvenile justice centers. We can't write off another generation if we got 73% of our juveniles killing themselves. If it's by police, if it's by drugs, if it's by on black violence. So when I go to dealing with how do and where do we go from here, if we don't make a decision and come together, which is we've been talking this talk for a while, how do we come together to put place in each community, if it's the church, if it's the school, we must put centers in there to how do we treat untreated trauma is a dangerous thing.
Dr. Matthews, I know Mr. Gordon has illuminated. Are you still with us, Dr. Matthews?
Yes, sir. I'm here, Dr. Gilmore. I apologize.
I hope you heard that last presentation.
I did hear my good friend and brother, OG1. And only thing I can tell, I don't have much data with me, but the data I do have is my own experiences as I interact and engage with the urban community from the ages of, I guess you could say, 23 and to 35, right? And what I've noticed is everyone that I communicate with, once you get to have a conversation with them, talk with them, know who they are, most all of them are sharing how they are suffering from anxiety, how they are on different medications, how some of them are suffering with bipolar and other things, you know. Some are being able to get the appropriate medical help and provider with appropriate medication to help them function more effectively, and others are not. They just kind of going through the motion and living with that. So I'm not quite surprised, because as OG was talking, I know this may be kind of putting my neck out there, but when you look at the dynamics, Gilmore, and we talked about it many times, about 70% of the households of single parenting, not to say that moms are doing a bad job, but when you have the absence of a father or father engagement and other supportive services, and you got the dynamics of economic strife and the gap of disparity of economic and health disparity, you know, you kind of, I guess you can understand that the sickness is there, or the ability to cope with it is not there, you know? So, I mean, it's a huge thing that I know we have to deal with. I know this, seeing the other day on the news that was dealing with the fact of the potential of gas shortage. Even myself wondered just how far it was going to go and what that impact that was going to have in our community, knowing or thinking that we wouldn't have access to gas. And so, I mean, you just have these compounding social crises continue to impact community, and you got people, as OG alluded to, not getting treatment. It just exacerbates it to a whole nother level. And with people who are unskilled with their sicknesses and their behaviors and don't have the appropriate medical support team, I mean, people do just, they do what they do to survive.
Dr. Higgins, there's been a thread between these conversations, which I think, is there any definition of evil that can be attributed to DNA other than the point you were making about, and what OG1 was making about, how in generations, some types of behavior exists. I was looking at the Palestinians and Israelis fighting. I was thinking to myself when I saw this little Palestinian boy just crying brutally, whatever, and the fact of how inbred some behaviors become, where it does become a part of the normal mental instability of a person's thinking in terms of towards a person or a group of people. If you understand what I'm saying, I mean.
Yeah, well, my thought is that it's, so far as the psychiatric, DSM-5, or some would call it the psychiatric Bible colloquially, there is no definition of what evil is. I'm not even sure if it's in the book, but you're looking at a set of characteristics of an individual, which is basically to destroy some others or one another in order for your own particular benefit. The difference between that and mental illness is that mental illness is your perception is your reality. So essentially, you're perceiving a certain thing, and your behaviors are resulting from what you understand and what you know, and be it correct or incorrect. For example, just 2 days ago, I was running through the neighborhood. The sun was going down, and I do a little run walk, do about 2.5, 3 miles, and this a white woman has stepped out of her cul-de-sac and did not see me coming. I'm about 40, 50 yards behind. And at that, once she heard me, she started looking back a lot. And then once she made the corner, she stared at me a long time and picked up her phone. And when it's on her phone, trying to walk this direction while looking back at me. And so the thought is like, what are you fearing, or what are you concerned about? I'm out here doing exactly what you're doing and what everybody else is doing out here. But because you've seen this black face, a black male, you've now become concerned and afraid. Well, is she evil? I don't know the lady from any other person in the neighborhood. I don't know who that is. But the point is, she's been taught a set of things where she believes a set of characteristics put her life in danger, even though I live in the neighborhood and my house is paid off. So I've been blessed. So even though I own a house out of here in the burbs, in what is probably the most mixed neighborhood of a very white area,
Right.
I'm still perceived as a threat based upon the information that she's been given to her throughout her entire life. Now, is she racist? Yeah, probably, but that is because of a learned set of information.
Assumptions that she has.
Yeah, where that's coming from, and that's from the ignorant education that people have about other individuals. And I feel for our black males, and that a lot of them don't see themselves in this society, in this world. Because sadly, if you listen to the music, there's a song out now where they say, I bet you won't bring it. And if you do bring it, I bet you won't pull it out. And if you do pull it out, I bet you won't shoot. And this is one of the hottest songs out there on the radio right now. You're daring black men to bring out a gun and kill people. So through our music and through society, realizing that black people don't choose what comes on the radio.
Right.
We don't choose what's going to be our hits. But essentially, the fact is that a lot of kids, well, I ain't no thug, and I don't want to do rogue kind of behavior. And if I have done it, I got in trouble, and that's not a route for me. So if I can't see where there's a place for me in society, then obviously I'm not supposed to be here. Anger and frustration and the systemic racism that the young man is dealing with is now causing a problem. And this issue of suicides of black males that have been going up, of black males and black females have been going up in the last, say, 10, 20 years. They're running and keep going. And also suicides are getting younger and younger. And oddly enough, it is seen that the majority of it, not ain't odd, is going to be mood disorders. But oddly enough, it's bigger than that. For the younger group, it's showing to be more of learning disabilities and ADHD. In that I am young, I'm 6 years old, my whole life is about school. And for some reason, I'm struggling in school. And it's most dangerous for a child who is actually overly intelligent. Does that make sense? So essentially, I have the ability, I know how to learn, I know the information, but for some reason, I have a reading disability, mathematic disability, or expression disability, and I cannot show what I know, and the system is letting me fall through the cracks, even though I have above average IQ. And that is the most dangerous group. Those who are talented, but do not see an option for themselves, become increasingly frustrated. And they have hopelessness, comes to despair, and despair comes to suicide. And that's something that
Dr. Gilmore, I briefly mentioned segregation and integration. And I believe that was a turning point in our educational system, because I had the opportunity to be in school with both systems. you know, the integrated and the segregated. And I mean, we always had, you know, children that misbehaved.
Right.
But once we went into that integrated system, it became overwhelming in regards to the discipline of African American boys and girls, and primarily boys.
Right.
And so certainly when they got to that point, then we really started getting the deficits in the educational piece. And then of course that exacerbated the behaviors and certainly then put them in situations that took them out of the regular classroom, which means that they didn't even have the same socialization after that. And so you have to wonder, was the system designed in that way for us to be in the gaps, to fall in the gaps, to fall in the cracks? Because the way it was working, and maybe working too well. Because I always say that my Jack Yates class could compete with anybody, anywhere, okay? But then as the integration went away, no, I'm sorry, the segregation went away and the integration was the norm, it totally changed. I mean, you know, they put the Anglo teachers in the Black schools and they were in fear, you know, because of their own biases, because, you know, I feel children are children. And consequently, a lot of times I think they treated the males like studs, so to speak. Right. Some of them developed relationships with some of these high school boys in particular. And so it really, really changed the dynamics of education. And so, you know, I think that's, you know, when you look at the Muslims, they believe that you educate your own children. And I think that has a lot of value because both my parents were teachers. And I know that children fared better with teachers that looked like them because there were not the biases that they had to overcome, you know, and then a lot of the teachers felt, oh, these are Black children, they don't know anything.
Right.
So the Black children were challenged after, you know, we went into integration.
Right.
And so, you know, I don't know how we get back to real education because we have lost a generation or two of African American children who came up in a system that was not designed for us.
Right.
And so, you know, it's just a real concern. But I almost fell out of my chair when OG1 said 73%. I mean, that just floored me. I'm gonna have to look into that because that is beyond frightening. To know that is how we become extinct. Because I don't care what science does, it still takes a male and a female, right?
Right.
In most instances, unless everybody's going to the lab. And, you know, you got these lab babies. But we can become extinct if our young men continue down that path of suicide or incarceration. And so it's a crisis. It's something that has to be turned around.
Or becoming double-minded.
I'm gonna leave that one alone, but yes. Lord, I'm gonna have to get off this call.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabazz.
But Dr. Gilmore, that's quite interesting that Councilwoman Shabazz raised that point because I never forget with my engagement when Ryan was Ryan, and working with Ryan and Yates and Blacks in those schools in that area, how I saw so many students who were 17 years old in the 8th grade. And many of them were diagnosed with some type of diagnosis in the DSM-5 or DSM-4 at that time. and how many of them had to be pushed out of that to the high school level, still not having the mind, the personal development academically to even continue a pathway of success, you know? And so even when they got to Yates, I found it even continually more baffling that a student can be on the enrollment up to the age of 24, I believe it is, or 25 years old, and not have graduated. And that became a huge liability for the school system, but there was nothing in place to support those students to get them to a place of achieving and excelling academically. So I'm not surprised that these numbers are startling. To me, it's compounding, and the perpetuation of this situation continues to grow in our community, man.
Well, you know,
and I have one other thing, if I could, before I go. And we lost respect for trades. We lost respect for trades. Everybody started pushing their children to get a college degree, okay? And then we started teaching our children that they were not college material, which means that you deflated them at the onset and not looked at the value of trades and looked at it. I look as a trade, going into a trade school is still a form of college.
Right, it is.
And so we have to stop that. We have to stop telling our children they're not college material, because you have deflated them and they will not rise to their potential. And I can't think of what I would do without my mechanic, my electrician, my plumber, you know, those people who may not have touched the university system,
right.
but they did access an education which gave them potential. And the truth of the matter, they generally make more money than the academician.
Right.
So if that is the measuring stick,
that's true.
Right.
We have to stop. We have to stop. I mean, college educations are great. I'm heading out here now. My college reunion is going on virtually. Spelman College, glad, woo. But you know, I did this because it got me to where I wanted to go.
Right.
So everybody needs to choose their path. But trades are just as, and in some cases, more important than academia. But anyway, I love you guys. I'm glad I was able to bring a little estrogen in this testosterone conversation. And so I will talk to y'all soon, but I got to go across town. Just call me at the last minute anytime, Dr. Gilmore.
It's a blessing.
Anytime. All right. Take care. All right.
Have a good one. You too.
I need to talk to you about getting that building still.
You do know my digits, huh?
Yes, ma'am. I will get back with you, Dr. Shabazz.
Okay, I'll be waiting on your call, brother. I love you here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right, bye.
OG, you was finna say something?
Yes, I was. You know what I'm saying? You know, the topic I'm dealing with, it was a brother that did a study out of Texas A&M, come to the prison system and did a study, because 80% of the brothers that he found when he did the study inside the prison system suffer from dyslexia, another different mental illness that we don't talk about in the brothers in the jail. Why the brothers can't read? Because again, it goes back to those issues of being shamed and embarrassed. That's an ashamed when you're dealing with egos of black men. Dyslexia, when I can't read. You know what I'm saying? She made a great point, because when I was in middle school and high school, what saved me, because I had dyslexia, I was sent to a COTC trade school downtown. I learned how to do a trade, which was building maintenance. I was able to live on the skills that I learned, because building maintenance taught me how to do electrician, how to do plumbing, how to do these things. And I was given jobs in certain apartment complexes on the skills. You know what I'm saying? Not that I could pass junior high school or high school, but I had a skill that kept me moving on and kept me supporting myself and supporting my family. But again, it goes back to what the brother said. During the time when they was moving when they moving the steel mills out of the community. My daddy had an 8th grade education, but he worked at a steel mill. He could support the family on the skills that he had at the steel mill in Alameda Plaza. But when they went to addressing the issue where taking trades out of school to put it on the college level, that was another move to povertize the neighborhood, to run the black man out the family, because he knew that a lot of us wasn't skillful enough to move to that next level of college.
Dr. Mills, I don't want you to leave from that thought of evil. Is this systemic racism a part of what America has to address in the next months or weeks? Is it
No question,
systemic?
no question about it. Like I said earlier, racism in and of itself is a mental illness, because if an individual thinks he or she is better than another human being solely because of skin color, you have a real problem. And that's what we see going on in society in general. I mean, how can you explain 73 million people voting for a man who you knew had no God conscience? Donald Trump didn't have any God conscience. He was a man that had institutional power, the power of the presidency, to rule over people and to make decisions about the quality of life of other people. But he couldn't discipline himself. He had no self-discipline. You know, he's been a man that's been out of control all of his life. You know, 6 bankruptcies. You know, and you go tell someone you're a businessman and you done had 6 bankruptcies. You know, you done flim-flammed everybody all your life. You start out with millions of dollars, you know, inheritance from your father, $200-300 million. And you go broke 6 times because you flim-flamming. And then you have all of these people who adore this man and follow this man. Something is wrong. You know, that's sickness. And it's all because white people, too many of them, want something for nothing based on skin color, based on, you know, white privilege. That's all it is. And when you have that kind of system operating, you know, it's enough to throw the average non-white person off. And the thing that we have to do as Black people and Black men, we got to strengthen our institutions. We got to shape these Black churches up with these Black pastors, because a lot of them, they way out in left field in terms of what they're dealing with, in terms of how they deal with resources and the development of the Black community. We got to hold them to account. And obviously we have to hold the educational system to account. When I was coming along, you may not believe this, but every teacher I had from kindergarten all the way through the 12th grade, I remember. And I used to go back home and visit all my teachers, and my wife grew up in Chicago. And I would take her home with me and go around and visit all my teachers, the principal. She said, well, how do you know these people? I said, I know them because they lived in the community with you. And you knew them, and they knew you. They knew your mama, your daddy, your uncles, aunts, and everybody, and so forth. You know, so you loved them, and they loved you. And they could even discipline you. You know, your parents gave, hey, if Bobby or so-and-so get out of line, hey, you Taz behind up, and that was it. But all of that has gone by the wayside.
Well, Dr. Matthews, you still there? Dr. Matthews might be gone. Dr. Higgins, I don't want you to end a thought. Give me an ending thought relative to this idea of systemic racism in our institutions and how it affects, as OG1 and Shabazz was saying, our family structures, our future, you know, and how do we educate people?
You know, as stated by, you know, OG1 as well as Dr. Matthews, the issue of how it hits the home and the family. As we talked about, 70% of African-American homes are with a single woman in charge. Women, Black women, earn the least amount of money in America. So that puts about a quarter to a third of all your population of Black children in poverty.
Yeah.
And then the men aren't there because they're incarcerated. All right. or the ones who I know who come out of school. I had a young lady said she was graduating from UT. As her white classmates were getting married, who were getting married to their boyfriends, their black male boyfriends had no thought of marrying them. It's time now to go be player because I got a little money, I got a little change. I could put this BMW, have some nice clothes, and I'm supposed to run the women. All right. And then you got those who are incarcerated. So we've got to look at the system. And the fact is that the problem is that the family structure is damaged.
That's it.
Basically, if you have a black man and a black woman living in the same house who are both gainfully employed, they are no longer impoverished. You at that point are at minimum working class, which means that you can pay bills for an apartment, maybe even have a small home, have 2 adequate vehicles to drive, and can educate your children and have enough resources to do that. All right. So the problem is that we've got to make sure that we understand the system that we're in, because it affects marriages, it affects housing, it affects incarceration, it affects education, your financial systems. All of that is put into the system. And once you understand the system, then you can do something about it. But a lot of us don't understand the system. It's like the movie The Matrix. Do you want the blue pill or the red pill? And once you take the pill and you wake up, then you see it.
And you know why we don't understand? I was going to say, you know why we don't understand it? Because the system works for the system.
The system is the system. But
and white folk control the system.
And we've got to teach individuals so they can get out of the poverty mindset. The fact is that you can change it all in one generation if you finally get it. So like we're talking about trade schools. Well, I mean, my cousins are not doctors. Most of them have a trade, and most of them make more money than I do as a physician.
Right.
All right. So your AC vac person, your plumber, your electrician who has the training and certifications, they're making $250,000 a year.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they just continue to build. And I tell people this, even if you went to college, that don't mean you don't want to do a trade.
Right. That's true.
All right. Because that pays more money than what you're going to make as an engineer.
Right.
An electrician makes more on average than the average starting engineer. All right. So doesn't mean you want to do that. And then the other thing is that they've taken trades even out of colleges. Realize that Prairie View had a ton of trades up to 30 years ago.
Yes, you do.
So once you understand the system, then you can fight against the system. One thing that you can do to change your situation in one generation is make sure your child is educated.
Educated.
If you get an education and get that kid out of high school and get them into a college or a trade, poverty in your family has stopped. That bachelor's degree is a ticket to the middle class. Somebody's going to pay you money no matter how racist they are, because you got a skill level that they need. I tell you right now, I had an issue with, and I need an exterminator in my office. This for the past 2 weeks. I could tell you I would have paid him whatever he wanted. His only competition is the next exterminator who will do it for less, right? So the fact is that I don't know how to do that as a doctor. You know, and I'll tell this joke very quickly. A doctor had a water leak issue. Plumber came over. Plumber charged him $200 for about 15 minutes. He was like, I don't make that as a surgeon. And the plumber says to him, well, you know, I used to be a surgeon too. So the fact is that these are necessary jobs, and we've got to learn and see the system for itself. That when your girlfriend tells you, listen, you ain't got to put up with that. All right. You don't need no man. Look at what I'm doing. Now y'all to split up and y'all got to pay 2 house notes. Right. And y'all got 2 kids. And y'all got to split you all's time. All right. Or the brother is, you know, you're in the house, you got a good woman, but you need to go be player out there somewhere else. Because the system has told you that your marriage and your home are not that important, but being a player is. But that's all game. And you've got to understand where you are so that you can combat against it. And everybody has to buy in. And we've got to make sure that we continue to teach our people what's going on. Once you see it, that poverty is gone in the generation.
Thank you very much. Doc is right about one thing. It's all about the family. And unless you strengthen the family, there is no foundation to community development.
Well, I want to thank everybody. The OG, I want to thank you. You've always put in that family point. Hopefully, Dr. Shabazz will have some information relative to that. And again, we're going to continue these dialogues with the support of Youth Media Source, Public Affairs, Public Access, program and make sure that people can get a word that they haven't heard in many cases. And I hope that those of you who continue to support Houston Media Source do that because of the free opportunity you have to share these messages. Again, want to thank our producer, director. Dave does a fantastic job. Mark does a fantastic job and has been doing that for over 30 years. And again, so glad to see some of you again and look forward to another invitation and some other opportunities that might be coming forth. I've been your host, Robert McKinley Gilmore Sr. You've had an opportunity to listen and look at Houston Media Source, Public Affairs, Public Access. Have a good evening.